The scent of 1,000 white roses choked her each petal, a thorn in her heart. From the shadows of a centuries-old cypress tree, 8 months pregnant and utterly alone, Isabella watched the man who was still her husband slip a diamond onto another woman's finger. He was a millionaire, a titan of industry, and he was publicly humiliating her in the most lavish way imaginable. But Julian didn't know the secrets she kept the silent vows made to her in rooms he could never enter. He thought she was a broken little bird. He was about to find out she was the storm. The wedding was a spectacle of obscene wealth, a carefully orchestrated performance set against the breathtaking backdrop of the Villa d'Este on the shores of Lake Como. Tourists on the ferryboats paused, their cameras flashing, trying to capture a glimpse of the fairy tale. But for Isabella Rossi, hidden away in a secluded grove, it was the final glittering nail in the coffin of her marriage. Her husband, Julian Vance, a man whose name was a synonym for power in the world of international finance, was marrying his mistress, Serafina Dubois. The irony was a bitter pill. It was here, in this very garden, under the same ancient wisteria, that Julian had proposed to her 3 years ago. He had called her his anchor, his quiet strength, the one pure thing in his gilded, chaotic world. Now she was just an inconvenient truth, a swelling belly that marred his perfect new picture. Isabella rested a hand on the curve of her stomach, where their son, their unborn child, kicked gently, as if sensing his mother's distress. She had begged him, pleaded with him when he'd first confessed his affair and his intention to marry Serafina. "Think of the baby, Julian," she had whispered, her voice raw, with a pain so deep it felt physical. "He deserves a family." Julian's response had been cold, clinical. "I will provide for him, Isabella. He will have the best of everything, but I will not be shackled to a loveless marriage." Loveless. The word had echoed in the cavernous, minimalist penthouse they once shared, a space now stripped of her presence, her books, her art. Had it always been loveless for him? Had the quiet evenings, the shared laughter, the nights she'd spent soothing his anxieties when a deal went sour, all been a figment of her imagination? From her vantage point, she could see him clearly. He was devastatingly handsome in his custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo. He leaned in to whisper something in Serafina's ear, a gesture so intimate, so familiar, that it stole the air from Isabella's lungs. Serafina, a willowy former model with eyes the color of ice, threw her head back and laughed, the sound carrying across the manicured lawns. She was everything Isabella wasn't. She was fwa and flash, her public persona, as curated as her Instagram feed. Isabella was quiet, introspective, a woman who found solace in rare books and rainy afternoons. Julian had once claimed to love that about her. "You are my peace," he used to say. Now it seemed he craved chaos. The press was there in droves, a veritable army of photographers and reporters, held back by a velvet rope and a platoon of security guards. They called it the wedding of the year. The headlines were already written: "Billionaire Julian Vance weds socialite." Serafina Dubois in Italian paradise. Her own existence, her status as his legal wife, was a footnote he was ruthlessly trying to erase. His lawyers had sent her the divorce papers 2 weeks ago, offering a settlement that was generous by any normal standard, but insulting in its implication: take the money and disappear. Be a good, quiet girl. She hadn't signed them, not out of hope for reconciliation, but out of a stubborn refusal to make this easy for him. Her lawyer, a bulldog of a man named Marcus Thorne, had advised her to wait. "We have leverage, Isabella. The pregnancy is public adultery. Don't fold yet." But watching them now, seeing the triumphant smirk on Serafina's face as she flaunted the colossal diamond, a gaudy monstrosity that eclipsed the elegant sapphire Julian had given her, Isabella felt her resolve crumble. What was the point of fighting? He had already won. He had the world at his feet, the woman he wanted on his arm, and the power to silence any inconvenient truths. A gust of wind rustled the leaves of the cypress tree, a sudden chill in the warm Italian air. Dark clouds were beginning to gather over the mountains on the far side of the lake, a stark contrast to the brilliant sunshine bathing the wedding party. It felt like an omen. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a single discreet vibration. She pulled it out. It was a message from an unsaved number, but she recognized it instantly. "Patience, Principessa, the cavalry is coming." Isabella's breath hitched. A flicker of something she hadn't felt in weeks, a spark of defiance ignited in her chest. She looked back at the wedding, at the man who was erasing her, and for the first time that day, a genuine, albeit faint, smile touched her lips. Julian thought he knew everything about her. He knew Isabella Rossi, the quiet art historian from a modest family. He had no idea who Isabella di Sforza really was. And he had no idea that the silent allies she had cultivated, the powerful figures from a life he never knew existed, were about to descend on his perfect curated world like a gathering storm. The first drops of rain began to fall fat and cold, spotting the dark silk of her maternity dress. The performance was about to begin. The ceremony reached its crescendo. The officiant, a man whose face was familiar from celebrity magazines, pronounced them husband and wife. A roar of applause erupted from the guests, a symphony of the rich and influential, celebrating the union of power and beauty. Julian dipped Serafina in a dramatic kiss, a move clearly designed for the cameras. It was a perfect shot, a moment of manufactured passion that would be on the cover of every tabloid by morning. For Isabella, watching from the shadows, the sight was a physical blow. The last vestiges of the woman who loved Julian Vance died in that moment. The pain that had been a constant dull ache for months sharpened into something cold and hard and clear. It was no longer just grief. It was resolve. She had to leave. To stay any longer would be to let the humiliation consume her whole. Holding on to the rough bark of the cypress for support, she turned to make her way back to the small, inconspicuous car she had parked on a side street. But as she turned, she saw them. Julian and Serafina walking hand in hand, not towards their reception, but directly towards her grove. A small entourage, including Julian's best man and Serafina's maid of honor, trailed behind them, champagne flutes in hand. Panic flared in Isabella's chest. He couldn't see her like this, swollen heart broken a ghost at his feast. She tried to shrink back further into the shadows, but it was too late. Julian's eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto hers. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second before it was replaced by a mask of cold fury. "Isabella." His voice was low, menacing. "What in God's name are you doing here?" Serafina clung to his arm, her expression a perfect blend of feigned concern and malicious triumph. "Oh, Julian, darling, look. It's your ex." She let the word hang in the air, a deliberate sting. "I didn't realize you'd been invited." The small entourage behind them fell silent, their eyes flicking between the regal new bride, the furious groom, and the heavily pregnant woman in the shadows. The air crackled with a tension that was more dramatic than any staged ceremony. "I wasn't Isabella," said her voice surprisingly steady. She met Julian's gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm still your wife, Julian, in the eyes of the law, if not in your heart. I thought I should witness the moment you committed bigamy." A gasp rippled through the small group. Julian's face darkened. "Don't be ridiculous. The papers have been filed. You were sent a generous offer. It's your own fault for not signing." "Generous?" Isabella laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "You call that generous a pittance to erase 3 years of my life, to buy my silence while you parade your infidelity for the world to see." My darling Serafina interjected, her voice dripping with saccharine pity. She stepped forward, her white gown pristine against the darkening grass. "You're making a scene. You're clearly overwrought. It's the hormones, I imagine." She glanced pointedly at Isabella's stomach. "Julian has offered to take care of you. Of it. You should be grateful." The dismissive wave of Serafina's hand towards her unborn child was the final cut. The carefully constructed dam of Isabella's composure broke. Grateful Isabella stepped out of the shadows, her presence suddenly commanding. The rain was falling more steadily now, clinging to her dark hair, but she didn't seem to notice. "Grateful that my husband is attempting to discard me and his own son like a corporate asset that's underperforming. Grateful that he's replacing me with you. A woman whose only notable achievement is climbing her way out of obscurity by sleeping with other women's husbands." Serafina's face flushed an ugly red beneath her perfect makeup. "How dare you, I dare, Isabella," said her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more weight than all their shouts. "You have no idea what I dare." She looked at Julian, her eyes boring into his. The love was gone, replaced by a chilling disappointment. "I came here today to see for myself what I was losing. And I have. I see a weak man, so terrified of his own heart that he surrounds himself with shiny, empty things to feel powerful. And I see a woman so desperate for validation, she'd build her happiness on the ruins of another's." Julian took a step forward, his hand raised as if to silence her. "That's enough, Isabella." "It is," she agreed, pulling her gaze away from him as if he were no longer worth her attention. "It is more than enough." She turned her back on them, on the gasping guests, on the man who was the father of her child. As she began to walk away, her steps slow and deliberate, the heavens seemed to open. The gentle rain transformed into a torrential downpour. Thunder cracked overhead, a sudden violent sound that made Serafina shriek and cower against Julian. But Isabella didn't flinch. She kept walking, her head held high, the rain plastering her dress to her body, outlining the defiant swell of her belly. She was walking away from her old life, a sodden, solitary figure against the backdrop of a ruined society wedding. Julian watched her go, a strange, unreadable expression on his face, a flicker of doubt or just annoyance that his perfect day was being upstaged by a pregnant woman and a thunderstorm. As Isabella reached the edge of the villa's grand iron gates, the distant purr of an engine grew louder. It was a low, powerful sound, the kind of sound that announced the arrival of not just wealth, but of consequence. A pair of headlights cut through the deluge. A car, long, black, and impossibly sleek, pulled to a silent stop directly in front of her. It wasn't a taxi. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, a vehicle that cost more than the average person's house, its black paint gleaming like wet obsidian in the stormy afternoon. The rear door opened with a quiet, expensive click. An umbrella, also black, unfurled, held by a chauffeur in a flawless uniform. He held it over Isabella, shielding her from the downpour as if she were a queen. From inside the car, a figure leaned forward. Isabella paused, her hand on the open door, and glanced back. Through the sheets of rain, she could just make out Julian and Serafina standing frozen on the lawn, their perfect wedding dissolving into a chaotic, muddy mess. They were staring, confused and wary, at the impossible sight. Who was Isabella Rossi? The quiet, discarded wife. The penniless art historian. As the first black car waited its engine, a low, patient thrum. The answer began to announce itself. Julian Vance was about to learn that the woman he had tried to erase was more powerful than he could ever have imagined, and her allies, the ones who had just arrived, did not play by his rules. The interior of the Rolls-Royce was a cocoon of silence and luxury. The chaos of the storm instantly muted by layers of soundproofed glass and supple black leather. The air smelled of old money and authority. Seated opposite her was a man Isabella had not seen in person for 5 years, though his influence had been a quiet, constant presence in her life. He was Alessandro Vincenzo, her godfather. To the world he was a recluse, a legendary figure in European finance, the so-called kingmaker, who operated from the shadows, his wealth so vast and old, it made Julian Vance's fortune look like a rounding error. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair, piercing grey eyes that missed nothing, and a face that looked like it had been carved from Tuscan marble. He was family, not by blood, but by a bond forged in loyalty and secrets long before she had ever met Julian. Alessandro. Isabella breathed a wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled her. He reached across the space between them and took her cold hand in his warm, dry one. His touch was firm, paternal. Mia cara Isabella. My little principessa, did you think we would abandon you? Tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in front of Julian now welled in her eyes. I didn't know who else to call. You did not need to call. We have been watching, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. We gave Mr. Vance enough rope to hang himself. It seems he has fashioned a rather elaborate noose. His gaze flickered past her out the rain-streaked window, towards the villa where Julian and his bride were now being ushered inside by frantic staff. He is about to learn a very old, very important lesson. The Sforza name is not to be dishonored. Isabella flinched at the mention of her family name, the name she had shed when she married Julian, hoping for a simpler, anonymous life. Sforza. A name that carried the weight of centuries of Italian nobility, of power brokers, patrons of the arts and figures who had shaped the destiny of nations from behind the scenes. She was descended not from modest art historians, but from one of the most powerful and discreet dynasties in Europe. A fact she had deliberately hidden from Julian, wanting to be loved for herself, not for her connections. It had been a naive, romantic dream. He never knew, Isabella said quietly, wiping a tear from her cheek. I wanted a life away from all that. A life that was just mine. And you deserved that, Alessandro said, his expression softening. But you chose a man who understands only one thing, power. He mistook your humility for weakness. He mistook your independence for isolation, a fatal miscalculation. The chauffeur closed the door, and the car began to move, gliding away from the villa, with a silent, imposing grace. As they passed the main gate, another car, a black Mercedes Maybach, pulled in behind them, and behind that, a black Bentley flying. A formidable procession was forming a funereal parade for Julian Vance's life as he knew it. "Who is in the other cars?" Isabella asked, her curiosity piqued through her exhaustion. "Allies," Alessandro said simply. "Family. People who owe your father a debt of honor. People who understand that when one of us is threatened, all of us respond." He gestured to a small built-in refrigerator. "Some water." He poured her a glass of San Pellegrino, the iconic green bottle, a small familiar comfort. He then poured himself a small glass of something amber. "Now," he said, taking a sip, "tell me everything, and do not spare a single ugly detail. Marcus Thorne has handled the legal preliminaries, but the real response begins now. We will be surgical. We will be swift. And we will be merciless." Isabella took a deep breath. For months, she had been drowning her story, unheard, her pain dismissed. Now she had the ear of one of the most powerful men in the world. She began to speak, her voice gaining strength with every word. She told him about the subtle dismissals, the gaslighting, the way Julian had slowly isolated her from the few friends she had made in his world. She told him about the discovery of the affair, the brutal confrontation, his cold-blooded proposal to Serafina while she was still living in their home, pregnant with his child. Alessandro listened without interruption, his grey eyes turning to flint. He was a man of few words, but his stillness was more intimidating than any outburst. When she finished, the silence in the car was heavy, profound. "He took your shares in Vance Industries as part of the prenuptial agreement." "Correct," Alessandro asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Yes," Isabella confirmed. "He said it was a formality. He put them in a blind trust managed by his board." Alessandro smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. "His board," he mused. "Let's talk about his board. Robert Chen, head of Asian markets. His company was on the brink of collapse in 2008. Your father personally guaranteed a loan that saved him, a loan he never called in." He ticked off a finger. "Lady Annalise Beaumont, British aristocrat with impeccable connections. Her family's estate was about to be seized for back taxes. A word from your uncle to the right people in Parliament made that problem disappear." He ticked off another finger. "And my personal favorite, Javier Morales, the tech guru from Spain. A brilliant mind, but he had a youthful indiscretion involving some rather sensitive government data. Your cousin, the one who works in intelligence in Rome, made sure the file was permanently buried." Isabella stared at him, stunned. She knew her family was influential, but the scale of their reach, the intricate web of favors and debts, was something she had never truly comprehended. 3 of the 7 board members of Vance Industries, Alessandro continued, his smile widening, owe their entire careers, their very freedom to the Sforza family. They have been waiting for a call, for a chance to repay that debt. I believe that call will be made tonight before Mr. Vance and his new bride have even finished their wedding cake. He leaned back against the leather. He wanted to erase you, Isabella. Instead, he has made you visible to us again. He has reminded us of our obligation to you. By the time the sun rises over Lake Como tomorrow, Julian Vance will find that the empire he built is a house of cards. And we, he said with a final chilling finality, are the wind. The convoy of black cars did not head for an airport or a hotel. Instead, it wound its way up a steep private road, deep into the hills overlooking the lake, a region tourists never saw. They passed through an ancient stone archway, unmarked and unadorned, and arrived at a sprawling, secluded estate that had been in the Sforza family for over 400 years, the Villa Falcone. The Falcon Villa. It was not a place of opulent display like the Villa d'Este, but one of quiet, unassailable power. It was Isabella's childhood home, a place she hadn't returned to since her mother's funeral. As the Rolls-Royce crunched to a halt on the gravel driveway, the doors to the villa swung open. A staff of familiar, loyal faces greeted her, not with pity, but with a quiet, fierce respect. Benvenuta. A casa principessa, the elderly butler, Massimo, said, his voice thick with emotion. Welcome home. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of beeswax and old stone. The men from the other cars were already there, gathered in the grand library, a 2-story room lined with priceless books and dominated by a massive, centuries-old fireplace. They were the allies Alessandro had spoken of, a formidable assembly of power. There was Kenji Tanaka, a Japanese industrialist whose quiet demeanor belied a ruthless business acumen. His father had been saved from a hostile takeover by Isabella's grandfather. He bowed deeply to her. Isabella-san, it is an honor to stand with you. Next to him stood Sheikh Rashid Al-Jamil, a member of a powerful Emirati royal family whose investments controlled significant portions of the global energy market. He had attended Oxford with Isabella's older brother, and they were bound by a friendship that transcended business. Isabella, he said, his voice warm, but his eyes hard. Tell me what you need. It is yours. And then there was Elena Petrova, a woman who looked more like a Bond villain than a businesswoman. Sharp, elegant, and notoriously brilliant, she was the CEO of a global private security and intelligence firm. Her connection was the most personal. Isabella's mother, a renowned philanthropist in her own right, had rescued Elena from a trafficking ring in Eastern Europe when she was just a teenager and funded her education. Elena owed her entire life to the Sforza matriarch. He will not know what hit him, Elena said, her Russian accent clipping her words with precision. My teams are already in place. We have been running passive surveillance on Vance Industries for the past 48 hours. We have found irregularities. Many irregularities. This was the true nature of her family's power. It wasn't just wealth. It was a global network of loyalty, a tapestry of debts of honor that could be called upon at a moment's notice. Julian had tried to humiliate a woman he thought was alone. He had, in fact, declared war on a dynasty. Alessandro took his place at the head of the massive oak table. Friends, he began. Thank you for coming. Our purpose is simple. We are here to rebalance the scales. Julian Vance has committed an offense not just against Isabella, but against the honor of our collective houses. He turned to a large screen that descended silently from the ceiling. Elena, if you would. Elena Petrova stepped forward, a tablet in her hand. With pleasure. An organizational chart of Vance Industries appeared on the screen. As we know, Vance's empire is built on 3 pillars: finance technology and luxury real estate. It appears strong, but it is over-leveraged. He has been using creatively, and I use that word generously structured debt to finance his acquisitions. He's been shuffling assets between shell corporations to hide losses and inflate his company's valuation. She swiped the tablet, and a complex web of transactions appeared on the screen, flowing between entities in the Cayman Islands, Panama, and Liechtenstein. My forensic accountants have found the pattern. It's a classic Ponzi scheme, albeit a very sophisticated one. He uses the influx of capital from new investors to pay off the old ones, all while siphoning millions into his personal accounts, like the one used to pay for today's theatrical production. Isabella felt a chill. She had always known Julian was ambitious, even ruthless, but she had never imagined he was a common criminal dressed in a bespoke suit. The key, Elena continued, is investor confidence. His entire empire is built on his reputation as an infallible financial genius. If that reputation were to crumble, if his key investors were to pull out simultaneously, the entire structure would collapse within hours. Sheikh Rashid leaned forward. My sovereign wealth fund has a significant position in his latest tech venture. We were planning on doubling our investment next quarter. He smiled thinly. I believe I will be instructing my fund managers to divest. Immediately, citing a loss of confidence in senior management. Kenji Tanaka nodded. My corporations supply the rare earth minerals for his tech division. I foresee significant, unavoidable supply chain disruptions starting at midnight Tokyo time. It would be a tragedy. Alessandro turned his gaze to Isabella. And the board members I mentioned earlier, Robert Chen, Lady Annalise Beaumont, Javier Morales, they are waiting for one call. They control 40% of the voting shares, enough to call an emergency meeting and force a vote of no confidence, enough to authorize an independent audit, which, thanks to Elena's work, we know will be devastating. He slid a satellite phone across the table to Isabella. The call should come from you, Principessa. Isabella looked at the phone, then at the faces around the table. They were not acting out of pity. They were acting out of a shared code of honor that Julian, in his arrogance, could never comprehend. He had broken the rules of their world, and this was the consequence. She picked up the phone, her hand steady. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about protecting her son's future from the toxic legacy of his father. It was about reclaiming her own name. Put Robert Chen on, she said, her voice clear and strong. While she made the calls one by one, methodically dismantling the board that supported her husband, Eleanor projected another image onto the screen. It was a live feed from a high-powered surveillance camera aimed at the grand ballroom of the Villa d'Este. The party was in full swing. Julian and Serafina were dancing, bathed in the warm glow of candlelight, oblivious to the storm that was about to break over their heads. They looked happy, triumphant. Julian raised a glass of champagne, no doubt toasting to his new life, his new wife, his perfect future. In the quiet library of the Villa Falcone, surrounded by her hidden allies, Isabella watched him on the screen. She felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a character in a movie, a man she used to know. The man on the screen was a fraud, and his world was a fiction. The first alert came to Sheikh Rashid's phone. A single discreet buzz. He glanced at it. The markets in Asia will open in 1 hour, he announced to the room. My sell order has been placed. It will be the first trade of the day, a multi-billion-dollar divestment. It will trigger every automated alert system in the financial world. Elena smiled. And my anonymous tip, complete with a starter package of incriminating documents, has just been delivered to the desk of the top financial investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal. Her name is Catherine Miles. She is famously tenacious. Alessandro Vincenzo raised his glass of amber liquid. To new beginnings, he said, looking not at the screen, but at Isabella. Isabella nodded, a feeling of grim, resolute power settling over her. The trap was set. All the pieces were in place. Outside the storm over Lake Como had passed, leaving behind a sky of impossible clarity filled with stars. But for Julian Vance, The real storm was just about to hit. The first sign of trouble at the wedding reception was subtle. A senior aide approached Julian, whispering urgently in his ear, while he was in the middle of a self-congratulatory speech. Julian's smile tightened, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. He waved the aide away, determined not to let anything spoil his moment. But a few minutes later, another aide appeared, this one looking pale and frantic. He thrust a tablet into Julian's hands. On the screen was the pre-market data from the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Vance Industries, VNC, was in free fall, a catastrophic vertical drop of 60%. The cause was listed as a massive, unexpected sell-off from a major institutional investor, the Al Jamil Sovereign Wealth Fund. Julian's blood ran cold. He excused himself abruptly, leaving a bewildered Serafina on the dance floor. He rushed to a private study, his top financial advisors already patched in on a frantic conference call. Panic laced their voices. "What the hell is going on? Why would Rashid pull out?" "I just spoke to his people last week," Julian roared into the phone. "We don't know," his CFO stammered. Their official statement just hit the wires. A sudden and total loss of confidence in VNC's executive leadership and financial transparency. "Julian, this is a disaster. It's triggering a cascade. Every hedge fund is trying to short us." Before he could process the first blow, his phone buzzed with a news alert. It was from the Wall Street Journal. The headline was a dagger to the heart. Vance Industries' House of Cards leaked documents suggest massive fraud, SEC investigation likely. The article was brutal, meticulous. It detailed the shell corporations, the inflated assets, the very creative accounting methods Elena's team had uncovered. It didn't make outright accusations, but it asked pointed, devastating questions, quoting anonymous sources deep within the European financial sector and close to the Vance Industries board. It was signed by Catherine Miles. "Get our PR team on this. Kill the story, sue them." Julian yelled, sweat beading on his forehead. "We can't," his head of communications squeaked. "They're not alleging, they're just reporting on leaked documents. It's airtight journalism. And, Julian, it's already been picked up by Reuters, Bloomberg, and the AP. It's everywhere." Then came the final fatal blow. An email landed in his inbox with the subject line, "Emergency Board Meeting Notification." It was from the office of Lady Annalise Beaumont. The meeting was scheduled for 1 hour from now. The agenda, a vote of no confidence in the CEO, and a motion to launch a full independent forensic audit of the company's finances. The motion was co-sponsored by Robert Chen and Javier Morales. Julian stared at the names. Chen, Beaumont, Morales. It was impossible. They were his staunchest allies, men and women whose loyalty he had taken for granted. He had built his board to be a rubber stamp, a collection of powerful people who owed him. Or so he thought. He felt the floor drop out from beneath him. This wasn't a random market fluctuation or a negative press story. This was a coordinated attack. It was an execution. His mind raced, searching for the source, the architect of this symphony of destruction. And then, like a ghost rising from a grave, the image of Isabella walking away in the rain, her head held high, flashed in his mind. He remembered the impossible arrival of the black Rolls-Royce, the quiet dignity that had replaced her grief. Her final words, "You have no idea what I dare." It couldn't be. Isabella, the quiet, unassuming art historian, the woman he had plucked from obscurity. How his office door burst open. It was Serafina, her face a mask of rage and confusion. "Julian, What is happening? My father just called me. He said, your stock is worthless. People are leaving the party. Everyone is on their phones. They're looking at us like we're criminals. Get out. Serafina. Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet. What? Don't you talk to me like that. I am your wife. A title that will be worth precisely nothing by morning. He snarled, the full weight of his ruin crashing down on him. This is all her fault. Isabella. Serafina stared at him bewildered. Isabella. What could she possibly have to do with this? She's a nobody. A nobody. Julian laughed, a wild, unhinged sound. We are fools, Serafina. We are absolute, complete fools. He had been so blinded by his own perceived brilliance, so dismissive of the woman he had married, that he had never once thought to look into her past beyond the superficial story she had presented. Who was she? Who were her people, who arrived in black cars to spirit away a discarded wife? The world he had built, the empire of glass and steel and digital code, was shattering around him. The calls were coming in a relentless flood. Lenders were pulling his lines of credit. Business partners were invoking termination clauses. The SEC had already announced a formal investigation. It was over. In the space of a single wedding dance, he had gone from a titan of industry to a pariah. Back at the Villa Falcone, Isabella and her allies watched the fallout on the screen in quiet satisfaction. They saw the news reports, the plunging stock tickers, the photos of panicked guests fleeing the lavish wedding reception. They saw Serafina arguing with her father on the phone, her fairy tale wedding dress now looking like a foolish costume in the face of utter financial ruin. Then Elena put a new image on the screen. It was a live feed from the security cameras outside the private study at the Villa d'Este. They watched as Julian, looking like a cornered animal, made a call. "We have audio," Elena said. Julian's voice, strained and desperate, filled the library. "Marcus. Get me Marcus Thorne." There was a pause. "What do you mean he's no longer representing me?" "He can't just quit. On whose authority?" "Isabella's." The phone clattered as Julian dropped it. He slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. He was utterly, completely alone. His own lawyer had defected. Alessandro Vincenzo turned to Isabella. Her face was calm, resolute. There was no glee, no triumphant celebration, just a profound, quiet sense of justice being served. "He will try to contact you," Alessandro said. "He will beg. He will threaten. He will promise you anything." "It won't matter," Isabella replied, placing a hand on her belly. "This was never about money. It was about respect. The respect he refused to give me or our son." She looked at the powerful figures assembled around her, and the respect he showed to no one. The final piece of their plan was yet to come. It was the most personal, the most cutting. Elena brought up another file on the screen. It was a dossier, complete with photographs and financial records. Serafina Dubois. Elena announced. While she was seeing Julian, she was also continuing a long-term affair with a certain aging Swiss banking tycoon, a man who happens to be one of Julian's primary business rivals. More interestingly, she has been feeding this rival information about Julian's business dealings for the past 18 months, for a very handsome fee. Sheikh Rashid let out a low whistle. So the viper in his bed was also a spy. "We will leak this tomorrow," Alessandro said. after his financial ruin is complete. It is important that he understands the full scope of his failure, that the woman for whom he destroyed his family was in fact an architect of his downfall as well. He looked at Isabella. A final poetic justice. Isabella gave a single slow nod. The humiliation would be absolute. He had traded a diamond for a shard of glass, and now he would be forced to see it. He hadn't just been outplayed. He had been a fool, and in his world there was no greater sin. Dawn broke over Lake Como with a cruel, painterly beauty. Ribbons of rose and gold bled across the sky, reflecting on the placid water, mocking the utter chaos of Julian Vance's inner world. He stood on the grand terrace of the Villa d'Este, not as a triumphant groom, but as a king surveying the ashes of his kingdom. The air, which 24 hours ago had been electric with applause and champagne-fueled laughter, was now heavy and still thick with the funereal scent of thousands of wilting white roses and stale, spilled alcohol. The silence was the most damning indictment of all, a profound cavernous emptiness where adoration used to be. His world had not just collapsed. It had been systematically, brilliantly, and silently dismantled in less than 12 hours. He had spent the night in a state of escalating panic, a caged animal rattling the bars of a prison he hadn't known existed. His frantic calls to bankers, to board members, to politicians had been met with a chilling uniform wall of silence. Voicemails went unreturned. Aides who once jumped at his shadow now sent terse, formal emails of resignation. He turned on a television in one of the suites only to see his own face staring back from a financial news program. A panel of sharp-tongued analysts were picking apart the bones of his empire with a kind of gleeful, clinical precision. They used words like hubris, house of cards, and a textbook case of narcissistic overreach. They showed a picture of him and Serafina from the wedding, their triumphant kiss now looking like a grotesque prelude to a tragedy. Then they flashed a picture of Isabella, a candid shot from years ago looking thoughtful and serene. The question everyone is asking, the anchor said, is who is the woman at the center of this storm, the quiet wife who it seems held all the cards? The story of Serafina's betrayal was the salt in the wound. It had broken online in the early hours of the morning, a sordid little tale of corporate espionage packaged for maximum humiliation. He could picture it perfectly, her whispered secrets to his rival over candle-lit dinners, her dismissive laughter about his ambitions behind his back. The woman for whom he had torched his life hadn't just been unfaithful. She had been a willing saboteur, another architect of his ruin. She had vanished before midnight, after a venomous argument in which she had accused him of deceiving her about the stability of his wealth. The irony was so bitter it tasted like poison. He was truly, utterly alone. A pariah, adrift in the wreckage of a life he had designed. It was in this state of absolute desolation that he saw it a single, unremarkable black sedan purring up the long driveway. It was not a car of a friend or an associate. It lacked the ostentation of his world. It was a vehicle of purpose, of grim function. A man in a simple, well-tailored suit emerged, his face impassive. He wasn't a chauffeur or a bodyguard. He was a messenger. He walked directly up to Julian, handed him a thick, cream-colored envelope and said, "From the office of Marcus Thorne." Then he turned and left his job complete. Marcus Thorne, his own lawyer. The bulldog he had paid a fortune to be his shield was now apparently a sword aimed at his throat. His hands trembled as he broke the wax seal which was stamped not with a law firm's logo, but with the intricate crest of a falcon. Inside were the divorce papers. They were not the papers he had sent Isabella. These were a different beast entirely. The language was cold, precise, and absolute. It was not a negotiation. It was a decree. He scanned the first few clauses, a flicker of incredulous hope sparking within him. She wasn't contesting the prenup. She was claiming no portion of his fortune, no alimony, no settlement from his now worthless stocks or frozen accounts. For a delirious second, he thought it was a mistake, an act of foolish, wounded pride. Then he turned the page to the addendum titled Reclamation of Premarital Assets of Isabella di Sforza Vance. Sforza. The name he had heard Alessandro Vincenzo speak in the library at Villa Falcone. The name that now seemed to seethe on the page. He began to read, his blood turning to ice. The list wasn't the modest collection of art, and the small inheritance he had condescendingly logged when their prenuptial agreement was drafted. It was a portfolio of such staggering scale and strategic importance that the air left his lungs. He saw a controlling interest in a Congolese mining conglomerate that held the exclusive rights to the cobalt that was essential to Vance Industries' tech division. He had spent 2 years aggressively negotiating that supply chain, never knowing he was negotiating with his own wife's ancestral holdings. He saw the deed to a vast tract of land in the UAE, the very land upon which Sheikh Rashid Al Jamil was building a multi-billion-dollar refinery, a project partially funded by a loan guaranteed by Vance Industries. The loan was now collateral against her land. The list went on and on. There were seed capital funds that had financed the very tech startups he had later acquired for a premium. There were trusts that owned the patents for key logistical software his empire relied upon. It was a web of power, silent and invisible, that had underpinned his entire ascent. He hadn't been a king. He had been a glorified manager, a court jester playing with the Queen's gold and thinking it was his own. His genius had been in leveraging assets she had quietly placed in his path, and he had been too arrogant, too blinded by his own reflection, to ever ask the source of his good fortune. The final pages were the most devastating. It was the custody agreement for their son. The language was surgical. It stripped him of all legal claims. No parental rights shall be granted. No contact shall be permitted. The child's surname will be Sforza. A trust funded exclusively by the assets of the mother will provide for the child's welfare and education in perpetuity. Julian Vance will be treated in the eyes of the law as a sperm donor with no further role. He was erased. The very act of annihilation he had intended for her had been turned back on him with a finality that was absolute. He had tried to discard her and his son, and in return her ancient, powerful family had stripped him of his company, his reputation, his legacy, and even his fatherhood. Miles away, bathed in the gentle morning light, Isabella stood on a sun-drenched balcony at the Villa Falcone. She wore a simple white linen dress, her hair unbound, her face serene. She was a world away from the weeping, broken woman who had hidden in the cypress grove. Alessandro Vincenzo joined her, handing her a cup of steaming herbal tea. "It is done," he said, his voice a quiet rumble. "He has received the papers." "And the company?" She asked, her gaze fixed on the tranquil horizon. "The board has accepted our offer. Marcus Thorne proved very persuasive," Alessandro said with a thin smile. "Through a series of proxies, the Sforza Consortium will acquire the salvageable assets, the tech patents, the infrastructure for a fraction of their worth. We will absorb them, cleanse them of his corrupt practices, and fold them into our own enterprises. We will build something stable, something honorable." He paused, looking at her with paternal pride. It will form the basis of a new legacy, a birthright for your son, a testament to his mother's strength. Isabella placed a hand over her swelling belly, where a gentle flutter reminded her of the future she now commanded. This had ceased to be about Julian long ago. It was about this life, this innocent child, who deserved to be born into a world of honor, not into the shadow of a disgraced man. Her phone buzzed softly on the stone balustrade. A message from Elena Petrova. It contained a single high-resolution photograph taken from a distance. It was Julian crumpled on the steps of the Villa d'Este, the cream-colored envelope in his hand. He looked hollowed out, a ghost haunting the ruins of his own party, small and utterly defeated against the grandeur of the setting. For a moment she looked at the image of the man she had once loved, the man who had caused her such profound pain. She felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no triumph. Only a vast, quiet distance. He was a chapter from a book she had already finished reading. With a simple, deliberate motion of her thumb, she deleted the image forever. He no longer warranted even a flicker of her attention. Below in the gravel driveway, the black Rolls-Royce Phantom waited its engine, a low, patient hum. Massimo, the butler, stood by the open door. It was time to leave. This was not an escape but a progression. She was not returning to a life of hiding, but stepping into her role as the head of her own house, the guardian of a dynasty. As she walked towards the car, her steps were not those of a victim. They were the measured, confident strides of a queen, leaving the chaos of a foolish man's war behind her, turning her face towards the calm, clear horizon of her own making. The past was settled. The future was hers to command. That's the story of how a single act of betrayal awakened a sleeping giant. Isabella's journey wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming her power, her name, and her destiny from a man who saw her as nothing more than an accessory. It's a powerful reminder that the quietest people often have the deepest roots and the strongest allies. Julian Vance thought he was the king of his world, but he was merely a pawn in a much older, much grander game. Isabella didn't just win. She rewrote the rules and took the entire board. If you were captivated by Isabella's story of epic justice and hidden power, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with someone who loves a story of ultimate triumph. What was your favorite twist? Let us know in the comments below. And for more gripping tales of drama and empowerment, make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next.